thank you everyone for coming. It's really exciting and yeah, very encouraging, I think, to have so many people here, hopefully interested in seeds. I'm afraid I can't see anyone's face. Scott, yeah. Are you able to? Yeah, great. Thanks. Okay, so I called it Running to Seed because I guess running to seed is something you often don't want to do in your allotment unless you're collecting seed. But what I'm going to try and encourage you to do is run to seed. And this is roughly what I'm going to talk about: why save seeds, how to save seeds, some kind of basic principles about the seed library. So for anyone who doesn't know much about it, I'll give a kind of quick overview of where it is and where it came from and what we're planning. And then most importantly, how to get involved with the seed library. And then there's going to be plenty of time for questions later on. So I was going to begin why save seeds with a short video clip. It's 2 minutes long. We tested this earlier and it worked fine, so fingers crossed. I'm going to full screen this video and you should be able to hear it and watch it.
When I'm working with seeds, I feel this deep connection to my ancestors. It feels like this such an ancient ritual that we've done for 10,000 years basically. And it feels there's such a lot of care that goes into it. Working with something that's so important. It's not something you can really rush. You have to be very perfectionist about it to get the kind of quality seed you want at the end of it. At the end of the whole seed saving process and you end up with this really lovely package of seeds, I just feel this real sense of satisfaction from all the work that's gone into it.
This tiny little seed is passed down from generations of farmers and people working with the land and working with plants. All the genetics trace back to that first plant ever domesticated. This tiny little seed produces a plant which then produces more seeds. That whole potential for the future is pretty amazing. Seed is important, and the story behind the seed is important. We set up Vital Seeds because we want people to get involved with that story.
I really hope that in 50 years' time, all of our children and grandchildren are living in a world where we have actually saved what diversity of seeds we have left, and even created more diversity. And that more people are growing food, more people are saving seed. And through doing that, we are much more connected to the land.
So that's a short video about Vital Seeds, a seed company that you can order seeds from, but also they do a really nice seed saving course on their website. You can purchase it and it has kind of a full resources and videos and things. So if you wanted to kind of follow a course in seed saving, I recommend theirs. So here's a kind of spider diagram of different reasons you might want to save seed. And maybe the most basic, simple one is to save money, not have to buy new seed every year. If you continue to grow the things that you've grown before that you enjoy, of course you can share seeds, so you can also grow things you haven't grown before. Saving seeds helps us grow climate resilient varieties because say you buy some seeds and you grow them in Glasgow, and then generation after generation you keep growing them in Glasgow. Over time, those seeds, the ones that survive, the plants that survive, will be the most adapted to our Glasgow climate. It also means there's a greater genetic variation in the seeds that you're saving, which means there's more chance that it will be able to react to different environmental conditions. So if things change, there's a greater chance your seeds are going to survive, your plants will survive. It also, in a very similar way, increases the natural pest and disease resistance of your seeds. So you're not relying on lots of, say, pesticides or artificial fertilizers. You'll have just seeds that are kind of naturally resistant because you've saved generation after generation. And again, there'll be greater opportunities for plants to be able to fight off disease and pests. It's also about diversifying our food system and taking control of our diet, so away from the very small number of companies that control much of seed production in the world. It means you can really have, so many different varieties of different types of vegetable, which are, often much more nutritious, much more flavorful, all the things we want from our food, and taking back control so that we're growing locally. So you might be growing locally already, but if you're buying kind of F1 hybrid seeds from a mass seed company, there's a limited control that you have over what you're growing for food. And then also reclaiming our seed stories and heritage. So kind of rediscovering the histories of seeds, histories of cultivars that have been grown and adapted especially for Scotland or for Glasgow, or for different parts of the country. I think some of the things that Max is going to talk a little bit more about seed lore later on. And in general, restoring this connection between land and life. So if we know the seeds that we've grown have been grown for so many generations and shared in our community, we have a greater connection to our land. And that's, I think, something we're going to talk about after our presentations. Vandana Shiva, probably well known to a few of you. She's a kind of internationally renowned seed activist. And essentially, so when a corporation controls seed, it controls life. So freedom is to save your own seed. So how to save seed? Is it easy? I maybe thought it was, and then discovered it maybe isn't quite so simple. So I've got this is a map of how you would save seed, all the kind of steps you would go through. There's a few other steps as well, but this is maybe a good basic outline. So you sow, you grow, you rogue, which is to maybe pull out the plants that aren't doing so well, the ones that are maybe being attacked by pests. You will probably transplant at that point, so you'll transplant the strongest plants. So sometimes there's a tendency to think that you'll leave some plants at the end of your plot and leave them for seed. And actually that's not what you want to do. You want to save your best plants, are the ones that you want to save seed from, because those plants are the ones that are doing so well. They're the ones you want to continue for another generation. Then you ripen your plants, and often you're ripening them past the point where you might normally harvest vegetables, because you're harvesting for seed, obviously. Harvest, thresh or winnow, which is very different for different vegetables and different plants, but it's when you're sorting your seed and cleaning your seed and kind of separating out the chaff. You might also be fermenting. If it's tomato seeds, you would ferment them to remove the kind of hard outer of the seed. So you're just left with the seed, sort of gel substance that's around the seed. You'll be left just with the dry tomato seed. Then drying, which is this long blue line because it's so important. But drying is really, really important if you want to be able to preserve your seeds, at least for a couple of years. Getting the drying right is important and also quite hard in Glasgow, especially with our very moist climate. And then storing, labeling, making sure that any seeds you keep are well labeled, have the variety in them. Also, if you can keep other records, such as what kind of soil was it grown in? Where did it seem to prefer growing? Did it have any companion plants that it seemed to work well with? Those kind of details are also really important. Not things that I have to say Glasgow Seed Library is yet equipped to capture, but yeah, important. And finally, share seeds with other people. So for example, you might find it very hard to grow, 2 different varieties of brassica because they so easily cross-pollinate. But you could grow one and your kind of friend or someone in your community can grow another type. At the end of the season, you can share seeds and swap. Things to be mindful of in sharing seeds, mention cross-pollination. It's a kind of big, really big issue is, and I think in allotments you might find a similar or like particularly the problem because everyone's growing everything. And it will be hard for you possibly to get a grip on what everyone's growing at the same time to make sure that you're not cross-pollinating your plants. There are things you can do, like you can, so isolation distances is one that might be quite hard in an allotment site, but you can also use certain barriers. So a barrier might be something like EnviroMesh. So you cover your plants at the point of pollination when the flowers are coming out to prevent cross-pollination. The barrier could also be time. So if you have something that is going to flower later than anything else, then that's going to, or earlier, that's going to provide a barrier also. But that's super important because what you want to do is produce seed that is true to type. And if you cross-pollinate, you've lost it, obviously. Things like squashes will be particularly bad for that. So biennials also, to be aware that obviously if you grow biennials for seed, you're going to have to wait quite a long time, possibly up to 16 months to be able to harvest your biennial seeds. That can also be quite helpful because you can be moving it around your plot, moving the plants around, so you will transplant them in the winter and make space for something else. So and of course you only need to isolate the time when it's going to flower. So there's also possibilities with biennials also. Minimum numbers, I'm not sure, we have a list that we've kind of compiled with friends of the seed library of minimum numbers for plants. And a minimum number is the minimum number you need to grow to harvest seed from in order to get good genetic diversity. So things like tomatoes, it's quite small. I think it's like possibly 5 or 6, depending on the tomato. So you just need to grow 5 or 6 plants and harvest tomatoes. But something else like a cabbage could be 40. I think we've got a cabbage that you need to grow 40 in order to save good enough seed. So that's huge impact on space, clearly. Yeah, so that's things like that you need to bear in mind. Space and support as well. Plants grown for seeds would tend to require a lot more space because they're going to grow bigger than plants grown for food. And also they might need staking and support in their second year. Sorry, some more things. Hopefully I'm not putting people off, but maybe it's nice to be aware of the things to think about beforehand. Is keeping the seeds dry as they mature. It's very easy to get mold, especially in Scotland. Your seeds will get moist and then, as soon as they get moldy, you've kind of lost your seed. So different ways you can do that. You can bag up your seeds. You can also move your plants in under a polytunnel before they ripen. Before they dry. They'll give you a greater chance of keeping them dry. I think, it can be an issue in Scotland for sure. And finding this dry, consistent place for drying seeds, it's something that I've been looking for the seed library, somewhere where we can dry seeds at a kind of consistent temperature to give them the longest shelf life possible. And then I guess it came up earlier in the talk I was in earlier, this idea of close observation, that growing for seed requires a lot of looking at your plants and observing them, and then keeping good records. So kind of the things you observe about your plants, like things like their germination rates, their characteristics, things that you want to be keeping records of, because that sort of carries the seed forward and lets you kind of grow a new generation of that plant. So where does Glasgow Seed Library fit in? What is Glasgow Seed Library? Hopefully some of you have heard of it. Some of you might also have borrowed seeds last year or the year before. It started in 2019. It's started by and hosted by CCA, Centre for Contemporary Arts, which is an art centre on Sauchiehall Street in Glasgow. In normal times, it is open to the public. It's a building that you can come in for free and you can access different things in the space. And one of the things you could access was the seed library. So this is, if anyone knows the inside of the CC, it's on the 2nd floor, the sort of balcony area. And the seed library lived in this cabinet. And inside were seeds, labelled up. And very well ordered. I'm not sure it's looking like that now, but very well ordered in their boxes. So we ordered seeds for the seed library in the 1st and 2nd year. So 2019 and 2020 ordered seeds from Real Seeds, Irish Seed Savers and the Seed Co-op. We're particularly interested in getting seeds from the Irish Seed Savers and Real Seeds. They're in Wales and Ireland, obviously. And their climates, I guess, best approximated the kind of climate that we have in Glasgow. maybe not exactly, but it was sort of trying to get seeds that were definitely going to do well in Glasgow. And of course, they're organic seeds and open pollinated seeds, which is what you need for seed saving. If anyone wants to, people might know already, but we can talk about F1 hybrids and open pollinated and the differences in the question time if anyone has questions about that. And these are kind of the founding principles of the library. One, that it would be free for everyone, so anyone would be able to access these seeds. Two, there was a focus on food specifically, so lots of vegetables. We're slightly kind of, I guess, adapting that now. Maybe still thinking about having plants with purposes, and that purpose could be medicinal, could be for pollination, for pollinating insects like bees. And also Annie's going to chat a little bit about dye plants as well. So that's kind of expanding a little bit now. And three, I guess the founding principle was that the Seed Library belongs to Glasgow. It doesn't belong to CCA. CCA happens to host it, but ideally and exactly it is seeds that people are growing in Glasgow being returned and shared with people in Glasgow. So I would say when it started, I wasn't involved at the very beginning, but when it started, I had a sense of being a bit of set it off and watch it grow. So we'll have this cabinet with the seeds. People will come and they'll take seeds and they'll return them. And it was kind of like, great, this will just happen. And perhaps it would have happened like that. Perhaps that would have grown. But I feel with the kind of last year in which the seeds haven't been in public access, things have changed a little bit. And I'd say that we've learned we not only need to be stewards of seeds, we also need to be stewards of seed savers, because seed saving is a skill and it has been lost a little bit. And it is something that we need to kind of work with people, educate. I mean, I'm talking about myself as well, because I'm certainly not a seed saving expert. I'm learning also. So yeah, we're also taking on this responsibility, I guess, to help steward seed savers also, which hopefully this is part of that process. Glasgow Community Food Network were really helpful and really active. Max is representing tonight, and Abby Morden came and gave us, this was the last public event we had before lockdown ruined everything, or the pandemic ruined everything. So this was our seed deposit in autumn, I think it was in November 2019. And you can see, so we're sorting seeds here. You can also see in the background of the picture on the right hand side, this zigzag machine, which separates out seeds from chaff. You attach a vacuum cleaner to the back of it. Very exciting. And obviously very, very time saving as well. So as CCA has remained closed, it did open a little bit last year, but we couldn't put the Seed Library back into kind of public view. We instead kind of switched to a request and delivery service. I mean, service is a bad word, but anyway, that's kind of how we managed to distribute the seeds last year. Part of that was redesigning the labels. So here is the old labels, which involve lots of writing by hand. These are the new labels, which you can see require a little bit less writing, and that's mostly because I had the seeds in my spare room and I had, I don't even know, 1,000 packets of seeds to write and like just like separate, sort and distribute. So I was like, I need to make the minimum number of gestures with my pen. And hopefully it's clear, it's kind of providing enough information for people who are receiving the seeds. I think one of the things we definitely want to work on is giving people more information about the seed that they've got. Yeah, perhaps some history of it, but also some more practical tips with seed saving. And this is actually from the middle of last year, so it's not at all everything that was distributed, but it shows you kind of the rough distribution of seeds. I did do a few more in the East End, I know. But yeah, so we managed to distribute them fairly widely, and possibly more widely than if people had just been coming directly to CCA to pick up seeds, which I think is a positive thing. Another thing that came out of having a request system, here's some seeds that people are growing. They sent me pictures. Another thing that came out of it is that we got to find out a little bit about the people who were borrowing seeds. So we know that a large proportion were quite new to seed saving. Some people were moderately experienced at growing, most not. And we had just under half of private gardens. So perhaps unsurprisingly, they're the people with the most space for growing seed. And 24% had a shared back green, 19% had allotments. So hopefully maybe someone's here who got some seeds. And also 34% had things like windowsills and balconies, and I think steps as well to grow on. That percentage adds up to more than 100, you might notice, because some people ticked a couple of boxes. But I think that really showed to us that one of the issues we have in Glasgow, or maybe one of the characteristics of a seed library in Glasgow, is that the growing of 40 cabbages is possibly never going to happen here. Although I'd love it if anyone can put their hand up and tell me they'd like to grow 40 cabbages. I'd be super happy. But maybe we need to think more about plants that don't need so many to be grown for viable seed. So that's something we're thinking about, is how we adapt the seed catalogue or the seed stock to best suit the kind of skills that people have and also the access to land that they have. So with the building being closed, we've kind of ended up collaborating with other people who've had open buildings. So Glasgow Women's Library hosted peas, tomatoes and beans, which are the easiest seeds to seed save from, if you'd like to get started with those. And they had a short exhibition. It was open maybe a month, 2 months last year. And we worked out a kind of very COVID safe way of people being able to take seeds without rummaging or touching too much. And then I guess I was just going to run through a few things that we've got coming up, which are also collaborations, again, while our building stays closed. So we're looking for opportunities to work with other people. So the People's Pantry in Govan Hill have offered to host a seed library. They have a very cold office, I'm assured. So we're going to move the whole cabinet there, keep the seeds nice and cold, but also provide a kind of collection point for people in the south side. I also have a budget this year for posting seeds, so that's great. It's going to save me a lot of cycling. We're working with Lamb Hill Stables and their community garden. They have very kindly offered us a space of 2 beds in their community garden, and those 2 beds we're going to be able to use to grow plants for seed, maybe 1 or 2 varieties. And maybe more importantly, it gives us an outdoor space so that when we can hold workshops and demonstrations and kind of give people some practical experience. That's obviously the thing we've really lacked over the last year, is being able to practically meet and physically do some seed saving together. I think that's really crucial for us. CCA doesn't have any outdoor space, so this is like fantastic that we might have this space in order to do that. So hopefully, if that goes ahead and we can do workshops at some point, some of you can join us. And finally, we're starting a reading and growing group with Glasgow Artists Moving Image Studios, who are also based in Govan Hill. We're going to begin by reading Derek Jarman's book, Modern Nature, in which he does collect seeds and sow seeds. So thinking about, reaching out to different groups, a connection with artists as well, which is obviously important because that's where we started from. And I think, I should say that Govan Hill Picture House, there's a site next door to it where GAMIS have gotten some funding to make a sort of outdoor growing space, a sort of outdoor cinema, outdoor social space. So keep an eye out for that, and I think we'll be working on the beds there to sow different types of seeds. And finally, I think I just wanted to mention that the request form for Glasgow Seed Library, it isn't quite live, but it's going to be launched on Monday. So if you would like to request some seeds from us, that will be live. There also will be a form if you'd like to return some seeds and share some seeds. There's also a way you could do that. Other ways to get involved. So growing seed for the library is like maybe basic, but also like the most important thing. Like we need viable seed for the library. And I imagine I'm talking to people who do grow and have maybe a bit more experience than other people in growing successfully vegetables and other plants. So you might be really well placed to grow seed and kind of have the skills to do that already. Also tell your friends about seed saving and about the seed library. Please do suggest varieties that you'd like us to stock. We're really thinking about different types of varieties. We'd like to stock more heritage varieties and things that have relationships to Glasgow, but also seed varieties that have a relationship to kind of various waves of migration and immigration that have happened in Glasgow, the way people have kind of moved into the city, different communities, different countries around the world, and maybe what seeds they brought with them. That kind of thing is also really interested in stocking those types of seeds as well. Please share your skills. I'd like to say that I'm not the most skilled yet, and it's kind of been a project of sharing with each other our different skills and different types of growing and seed saving. So yeah, I'd love people please to participate and share your skills with us. And research and pass on your seed stories. We'd love to hear if you have stories about seeds, if you discover anything interesting, if you grow an interesting seed. Yeah, I'd love to hear about that, and we'll work out a way of capturing those kinds of stories as well. We haven't yet really done that in much detail, but definitely something we'd like to do. And yeah, just going to close with this. This is kind of our a bit of a guiding principle for us, or a quote that guides what I think Glasgow Seed Library is hoping to do. I have a sort of, it's obviously very speculative, but I have a kind of 10-year plan for how I'd like to see Glasgow Seed Library flourish and grow and be successful, I guess. So this quote from Christian Brooks-Keeve, where he describes seeds as lines of flight, carriers of stories, nodes of connection between the body and the land, promises of a messy, free and fugitive future. And I will leave it there.
Nice, thanks. Scott, did you want to add something in between, or shall I just crack on? Okay, I will just crack on. So I also work at the Seed Library. Thanks for all that seed wisdom, Rowan. I'm going to build on some of the things that you mentioned. I came to the library last year having just graduated in history of art, and I was beginning to research the links between growing and art making and the connections that those things can make to history. And the help the library needed during lockdown was lockdown abiding, so that was convenient. And it was a nice place to be able to explore plants and how they hold information and can connect to creativity. So I started by sourcing some dye seeds for the library, and the idea that you could control and monitor the origin of your creative materials aligned with the ethos of the library in regards to food. There's also just something satisfying about being able to provide yourself with your own materials to work with, rather than having to depend on finding it, buying it. If you can create your own supply, there's just something nice about it to integrate into your process and practice. So I think Max might go into that a little bit with basket making later, I'm not sure. But we got our dye seeds from Nature's Rainbow, and that's a supplier in the southeast, and they're really, really great. Everybody should look them up. They're very, very, they have so much experience and so much information to share. So those seeds have gone out to some people across Glasgow, and hopefully they'll gradually adapt for use up here despite the climate differences. It's like a long-term thing to try. Some of them come from even further north than we are, so those ones should be grand. We're in the midst of widening the network of dye growers across the city, having had some requests from people. So hopefully this will mean it can become a shared activity, and people making their own materials will be able to share them. And also the more plants we've got growing, the more dye we have, which is just a nice resource to build on. So that's the most linear contribution I've had to the library. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about the information that seeds and plants hold about people and the nature of inheriting them and passing them around. So I was lucky enough to work at Lear Botanical Gardens last year, and I was archiving lots of non-living objects and aesthetically valuable things from inside the property, at the same time as plants and notes on how to grow them from the previous owners, and lots of really, really precious stuff. But what kind of struck me is the difference between inheriting the non-living things and the plants. Like the objects are kind of stuck in the time that they're from, but the plants and seeds and knowledge we got can kind of grow and carry on into the future. So that idea of how plants and growing life can kind of like ignore the traps of time, and being frozen in the past really appealed to me. And I think the library is quite representative of that, in the fact that it's a big source of information about people and place and plants, and lots of the packets have got notes saying who's grown them originally and where they're from. So yeah, inheriting them and sharing that knowledge is something that really appeals to me. And then also, just want to close up, there's a book about Lynn that it's called Scottish Arcadia, and it describes the idea of growing in itself as a creative endeavor, not simply just making something with them. So it documents the previous owners arguing about specific shades of red a plant would be, or how they describe the act of having the garden as both public and personal. So the gardens are riddled with evidence of the owner's personal style and inclinations towards what they like to grow and how they like to place them, even if it sort of like bends the rules of growing or is impractical. And I think the way it's like a combination of aesthetics and like science growing knowledge is something really special, and you can come at growing and look at that information from whichever angle that like appeals to you the most. So whether it's where something is from, or who's grown it, or that individual's approach to designing their garden, and collaborating with it in a sense. So that's a lot of stuff, but that's kind of what brought me to the library. And I think some of the things Rowan and I have spoken about is combining all those different angles to come at it from. So there's learning the skills, and also there's the literature around it, or the things you can make with it, or you could come at it just because it directly contributes to environmental things. And I think that's also one of the main things that I think is great about it. I'm also like selling it really hard because there's a space for everybody within it. So even if you don't want to get as mucky, you can still read loads of great books about other people doing it, and vice versa. So yeah, that's my contribution. I'm happy to hand over to Max or Scott or whoever.
Cool. Yeah, I can go for it if you want. Grand. I'm going to try and share my screen, so please let me know if and when you can see it.
Yeah.
You got it? Okay. So, well, first of all, to kind of introduce myself. So I wear a few hats. The main one is I'm a market gardener. So my market garden is called the Wash House Garden. Used to be called Green Heart Growers, but myself and my business partner are going our separate ways, and I've renamed the garden. So that's that. But then also, as you can see from the picture, I make wreaths. I also make baskets to sell. That's a new thing, but I've been really enjoying that this winter. And I also teach foraging. I'm very interested in essentially anything that connects to nature, and specifically ancient ways of connecting to nature. And I thought I'd include this wreath partly just to show off, but also because the little wispy silver bits are clematis seed heads. And part of what attracts me to seeds, and to these seed heads in particular, is just the kind of magicalness of them. So I just think they're beautiful, and they're kind of otherworldly and a bit alien looking. And this was a wreath I made for a friend's wee 3-year-old boy, and he's really into birds. So this was a kind of mystical, magical bird's nest that I tried to make. Yeah, so let's get cracking. I thought I would talk about who's growing who. So we're growing seeds, we're sowing seeds in our gardens and allotments. To what extent, Annie was just saying it's a creative process, and I completely agree. We're shaping this garden, but I think there's also an extent to which the garden is sowing seeds in and on us, both in a physical sense, like a literal sense, and a metaphorical one. So it reminds me of Darwin's trousers. So before Darwin went to the Galapagos Islands and did all his research there about evolution, he was a botanist, and he used to go on these walks around London, out and about his daily business. And he had his trouser legs just slightly turned up at the bottom. And what he would do when he got home is he would turn out his trouser leg and he would count the number of seeds and the varieties of plants that had collected in his trouser legs. So he was just, looking at all those seeds that had accumulated that had just been floating about in the London air. And he would count hundreds every day. So plants and plant seeds in particular are using us all the time. We're using nature and shaping it, but it's a two-way process. The picture on the left is some moss and fungi from a train station wall in Denniston. And I've walked past that wall hundreds of times and only just noticed that it had moss on it. But the spores from the moss and the fungi literally travel all around the world. There are moss spores that people have essentially traced. There are types of moss growing all around the world. There are moss spores floating, literally circumnavigating the globe. One spore can go around the world. They're just absolutely everywhere. And we're obviously breathing them in. They're all over our bodies. And on the right there, there's some winter purslane, which is the green stuff. But the stuff I'm really interested in, for what it visually shows, is the red arak there, which is a beautiful salad green, incidentally, if any of you are looking for salad green tips. Although it's not green. So is it a salad green? I don't know. But if you look at the bottom of it, you'll see, at the bottom of that picture, you'll see it's quite easy to see these powdery, glittery substance on the leaves. And that's bacteria. And that's part of, being an allotmenteer or a gardener. We're in contact with the soil. And when we're in contact with the soil, we're in contact with literally trillions and trillions of bacteria that are all over our skin. And when we eat those plants, they'll be all through our intestines as well. So for every one human cell in our body, there are 10 bacterial. So we're essentially just scaffolding for bacteria. And these bacteria influence our immune systems and how well they function. 99% of these bacteria actually improve our immune system. And they also impact things like our mood. So our gut bacteria in particular are really tied with our emotions. So the garden and the bacteria in the garden and the seeds in the garden and the spores are literally influencing us in terms of our physical and physiological makeup, but also in terms of our emotions. There's also an extent to which you could say the garden is teaching us other things like patience, for example. I was an incredibly impatient gardener in my first year, and bit by bit, gardening has changed me. So perhaps it's a bit pretentious, but I just thought I'd make the point that we sow seeds, but the garden is sowing seeds in us in all sorts of ways. And this is my garden. This is the one I work at, the Wash House Garden. Just so you can see the garden that has shaped me. I thought I'd talk about the silver birch, just to kind of bring it to actual seeds. So the birch is a tree whose mythology is kind of intimately tied to its seeds. Specifically, it produces thousands of seeds. Each tree produces thousands. I live about 20 meters away from a silver birch tree, and I live on a third floor. And if I open my window even slightly around the time that the birch has set seed, my room is just filled with silver birch seeds. So it produces thousands and they float really far. It's what's known as a pioneer species. So birch will quite often grow on like derelict sites where, there's been a building, it's been demolished, there's all this bare ground. The birch is one of the first things to colonize it because it does produce so many seeds and they float for so far. So it's perhaps not surprising that this tree is then associated with fertility. So there's this ancient Anglo-Saxon, Germanic / English god Ostara or Eostre, from which we get the word Easter. So Ostara was worshipped around Easter time, associated with fertility, associated with the silver birch in particular. And Easter was originally this fertility festival, or fertility celebration is what we think. And that's really because of all those seeds that it produces and how early in the year it produces them. It comes into leaf around Easter time as well, and it produces loads of sap around Easter time. So the Druids would have tapped the sap and made it into wine, which I intend to do this year. And then also it's interesting, I think, the birch in terms of witchcraft and Christianity. In terms of witchcraft, i.e. traditional Celtic herbalism and shamanism and druidism, I think witches would have been essentially herbal healers or shamans. And shamans around the world that still exist. One thing they have in common is that they're intermediaries between nature, the wild, ecology, and human beings. And physical illnesses in human beings are seen as signs that our relationship with nature has gone awry. So I think that's what witchcraft would have been. I think it was tarred as witchcraft as this evil thing by Christians, but actually it was this profound connection with nature that people would have used to have. And it was tied with a spirituality that wasn't compatible with Christianity. So it was kind of dragged through the mud. So if you look at Celtic beliefs around the birch branches would have been bundled together to make a broom, and that would have been used around Samhain or around Halloween time to sweep out evil spirits. It's a tree of protection for the Celts and for us as Scottish people. And then for Christians, this later belief comes in that it's a witch's tree and it will do you harm. So immediately you can see that the Christian conversion was tied in with a need to discredit this previous thing, and witches were suddenly evil. So the witch's broomstick is a birch broomstick. Yeah, that's one of the theories. There's a plant called broom, which incidentally is hallucinogenic. So you get witches riding a broomstick, perhaps hallucinating and having all sorts of visions. That has nothing to do with seeds at all, but that's just a bit of information. That's my bike, and that's willow in it. And I've gotten that willow to make baskets. So I'm going to just segue onto baskets. So this is something I started doing in October of last year. And I'd been making wreaths for a few years before, teaching wreath making, and always wanted to go into the baskets. And for me, obviously as a gardener and a forager during the summer and autumn, the opportunity to do something that retained that connection with nature. So I've been still foraging all winter long, but for basket materials in parks, along by the Clyde. Even in the city centre, there are some good little spots. So it means that for me, I have this chance to go into nature, to have this connection with the wild, and to be interacting with it again. I'm talking about, like, in terms of that bacteria. I've been chatting to the trees, apologizing for cutting them. The way I like to think about it is willow in particular, which is especially good for this, evolved at a time, and this is true, this isn't me, justifying my actions, evolved at a time when there were elephants in the UK. So we're talking thousands of years ago, the European elephant. And the willow, along with a few other trees like hazel and ash, evolved so that if this elephant was walking by and eating off it and grazing it and snapping big branches off, the branches can fall to the ground and start growing. These trees also evolved so that when those branches are snapped, multitudes of other branches will grow from that patch. So they've grown to actually flourish with being pruned or with being smacked off by elephants. So I just imagine myself as a little baby elephant going around grazing. So this, I think these are beautiful. I'm not blowing my own trumpet. I think all baskets are beautiful. And to make them with materials I'm foraging is just a profound sense of connection. And also traditionally, farmers would have spent their winters making baskets. So it's this really nice, that's one of their winter jobs they would have done. This real nice sense of connection to history and heritage. Living in a city, it's quite hard to feel like you've got ancestors sometimes. I was thinking that earlier. Right. You can also make things that are really useful in the allotment. Not that one previously wasn't. I'm going to use that as a garden trug. But this one, a willow plant support, super easy to make. What we can do, actually, if anyone wants to email me and get in touch, I can send you some videos on how to make this kind of thing and some book recommendations and all that sort of thing. Something like this will last you about 3 years. It's solid and it looks really nice. And the materials are free. Here's one I made a few years ago. You can see it's this really great support for these beams on the left. There's a little close-up on the right. They can be really beautiful objects. You need to take them in during the winter so they don't get rained on and rot all winter long. Here are some of the materials I've been foraging. There's willow on the left. So I've been getting that, some of it from down by the Clyde. There's these big ancient willow trees, and there's some really nice long, thin shoots that grow off them. But also the young saplings, the kind of offspring of those ancient trees that grow right on the banks of the Clyde. I've been picking them. So this stuff on the left, it was sunset one night. I was just, right on the banks of the Clyde, my feet sinking into the mud, chopping from these little saplings that were growing. Just really beautiful. And little moments that take you out of the city for a while and take you out of your head. You can get lost in these activities. And I can't recommend it enough as a way to experience nature over the winter. And that stuff on the right is dogwood. Grows in loads of parks. Whenever you're looking for materials for baskets, you want the most recent year's growth because that's really flexible. And anything you can wrap around your wrist, you can make a basket with. If you're looking for wreaths, you just need to make it into a circle, so it's a bit easier. I've also been using silver birch. You can see the catkins in this basket. And just below that kind of grey brown wood is blackthorn. So the long thin shoots of blackthorn are good. They're not quite as flexible, but they're still good and a beautiful colour. And I've also been using cotoneaster, which is a more kind of domesticated, cultivated plant. The tools you'll need, something heavy, like the things on the left. These are wrapping irons. If you don't want to invest in that, that's 10, 15 quid. If you don't want that, you could use, like a pestle and mortar, whatever the mashy thing's called. I always forget what's a pestle and what's a mortar. You could use that. That's just for wrapping down the weave, making sure your weave is really tight. I guess if you're good at karate chopping, maybe you could do that instead. The thing on the right is called a bodkin. You could also use a screwdriver or a knitting needle or a chopstick I was using as well. That's for making holes in the weave or holes in individual sticks, like this. This is the first stage, putting a hole through a whole load of sticks. This is dogwood. And then you put a whole load of other sticks through those ones, and that's called a slath. I think of it like spokes of a wheel. This is for your base, and these are thick, strong bits of willow or wood. You're then weaving around them in a technique called pairing. It's basically in, out, and with two different bits, in, out, and over and under. So each time you're going, they're kind of wrapping around each other. But like I said, if anyone wants video links or anything like that, I can send them. And then these long shoots at the end, spiraling out again like spokes of a wheel, are about to get folded up to become uprights. And they're the kind of scaffolding or structure of the sides of the basket that we weave around to make the sides. About 5 hours later, you get something like this. And the uprights, those long thin bits that you saw in the previous picture, get folded down to create this border around here, which is always a really nerve-wracking bit, because if they snap, then you are up shit creek without a paddle, because there's no replacing them at that point. And then the handle is ash, which again is foraged, and they used to use ash to make spears. It's super, super strong. This is a Highland creel or an Irish creel, so a traditional Celtic basket. You make it upside down. You can see these sticky up bits here. Those were in the ground, and you make it upside down, and then you pull it out at the end, and you discover how flat the ground really was, how wonky your basket is. So again, pretty nerve-wracking, but I kind of like that you don't have full control over it with this. This little bread basket I made. So it's quite nice playing about with different colors of all these forage materials. The green in there is a green dogwood. This is willow there, the orange stuff. And then the black stuff is steamed willow. And the red there is dogwood. And the green is willow in the middle as well. Making little bird feeders as well. These are my first attempts, so don't judge me too harshly. But again, you can make that in about an hour. It's just this really nice activity. It will look really good in the garden. It will last a few years. It's the satisfaction of making these things for yourself and connecting with nature, getting to know these materials. Because you have to listen to the willow, you have to listen to the dogwood, to learn their ways and kind of you fit yourself around them and they fit themselves around you. It's this dialogue. I'm a mad hippie, I know. Right, if you want to get in touch, Instagram or Facebook, it's the Wash House Garden. The Facebook, I've only just set that up for the Wash House Garden, so it looks like a kind of skeleton page, but trust me, I am there behind the scenes. So yeah, definitely like that page if you're interested. Instagram, I've been posting on for a while, so there's loads of basket pics and all sorts of stuff on there. And feel free to get in touch by email if you do want to chat about anything that I've talked about. If you'd like any basket book recommendations, or, you know, I learned partly by book and partly off YouTube, so I can send those videos around as well, including for stuff like those plant supports. But yeah, that's me. Yeah, really happy to take questions or whatever. But yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much, all three of you. That was brilliant and really interesting and quite diverse as well, which was nice. At this point, I'm actually going to stand back as much as possible because I'm sure people have got questions for you, but we also have, as we said at the start, Derek from SAGS. And it would be nice, I think, to get a sort of a combination of questions about the seed library and the other things that you guys were talking about that you were doing, and also the sort of the larger themes that underpin all of this. So as I said at the start, a bit about sort of stewardship and the process of making sure that what comes after is as good as what we've been able to enjoy. So does anyone have any questions that they would like to start us off with? Feel free to just unmute yourself and ask. Raise your virtual hand if you want to wait in line, or drop your question into the chat box and we'll make sure it gets asked.
I'll kick off if that's all right. Nice to see you all, folks. Question for Rowan with reference to cabbages at one end of the scale in terms of the numbers you need to grow to get enough decent quality seeds. And then you said peas and beans, and I can't remember the other thing that you said. There was quite a small number of plants that you needed to keep by to get a good return.
Tomatoes, I think.
Tomatoes, that's right, exactly. So where are the kind of where's the middle ground? What are people, you know, able to find that they can put a bit of effort into, but they don't need to give away 40 plants worth of space for cabbages? So what veg is in the middle?
I've just loaded up my special spreadsheet, which lists, which I've gathered.
It's one you prepared earlier.
Yes, it's one I look at regularly. I will say, though, I will recommend a book, which everyone recommends, by Sue Strickland, called Back Garden Seed Saving. And the reason I'm recommending, because it's a great book, but it also has a table on one page at the back which describes the sort of, it rates the difficulty of different aspects of the seed saving. So one of them is the number, obviously the minimum number, but there are other things that make it difficult or easy. So just to flag that book is a good resource for that. Let me have a look. I mean, things like courgettes, 15, we've got 15 you need to grow. I also should say we kind of doctored our numbers a little bit, because we added on about 20% for like crop failure, germination failure, and things like that. So in terms of what you'll get in a seed packet from Glasgow Seed Library, it'll be 15 courgette. I assume that means if you manage to grow 12 and save seed from 12, that's great. Like that's a good number. Lettuces, not so many. Lettuce, can be difficult for other reasons, but 15 for lettuce. The same for tomatoes and peas. I think 15 is the lowest we sort of went, actually. I thought it was lower, but yeah, 10 squash. You only get 10 seeds from us if you request it.
Wow, that's a lot. Or
Anything,
not
were you
much.
thinking about anything in particular?
Not anything particular, but the sort of second, because we're always allowed a follow-up with something like this, a follow-up question. You made reference, of course, to the Glasgow, specifically Glasgow weather. So is there quite a marked difference in terms of how the seeds behave here in the west of Scotland compared to perhaps the southeast of England?
Yeah, I mean, I would say Max probably knows more about this than I do, but for sure the season is shorter. Your frost is coming later, and it's a lot, well, generally, yeah, for the southeast, definitely it's a lot wetter up here. So you're going to have a lot of problems that you won't have down there, different problems perhaps than what they have. Do you want to jump in, Max, with some smarter things?
Well, I think that the one that I really notice is just the amount of rainfall that we get. You know, we've had lettuces literally rotting in the field. So yeah, there's definitely, and I think like there are really good heritage varieties that will survive our what's the word, climate, that are really good. But also what I'd say is a big difference is made by whether you're growing with seeds that are organic or seeds that are not, because seeds that are not have been bred to use with fertilizer and to use with pesticides. The little wimps, they can't stand up to being grown organically. So I really recommend just buying organic seed, ethically, but also just practically. It's so much better.
That's really interesting. That's a good point. Yeah, that's good. Interesting. It's really fascinating, Rowan, and Annie as well. Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Obviously, I can't join in with your seed library because I'm down south. But if I want to save my own seeds this year, what's the best humidity to save seeds at? And also, I'm involved with the Bristol Seed Swap, and we've had some seeds that have been frozen. So is there any benefit in actually freezing seeds? And if so, how long do they last? Or does it depend on the vegetable?
I mean, I'd say absolutely don't, purely because I imagine you'd be freezing in a domestic freezer, and it's just so moist in a freezer. Same with a fridge as well. Some people have asked about keeping seeds in the fridge. Don't do it. It's too moist in there. In terms of humidity levels, I don't know I don't have a number or anything, but basically as dry as possible, which is a reason why it can be very hard to get your seeds dry and then keep them dry. I think once they are quite dry, like, you just need to get them somewhere sealed. We keep the seeds in the cabinet in glass jars for that reason. They're already completely dry, and then they go into the glass jars.
A bit of a daft question, like with a bean, how do you know it's actually ready to be put away?
That's a very good question. I don't really know, other than getting to know your seeds and getting them to be as light as possible. If anyone else does have a better answer to that question here, anyone who does save seeds already, I think you can't get too dry. One of the things they say is you can use silica. So like, I'm not sure of the environmental impact of silica, so I'm not sure about that. But in terms of the little silica packets you can get that will dry out things, you can use those. You can put one of those in with a jar of your seeds to get them even drier. Someone today in the talk I was in earlier mentioned rice, and talked about possibly using rice, which is obviously, you've bought it dry. And using that to absorb some of the moisture too. But again, if anyone else has better tips or answer to that, please.
Okay, thank you.
Hello. I'm just wanting to, I just don't understand the volumes here. What's the difference between 40 cabbage and 5 cabbage? Why does it make a difference?
Do I have a good answer for that? Do you want to go, Max? Yeah.
Well, I don't know for sure, but I think it's to do with genetic diversity. I thought that was what it was to do with. Am I right?
Yeah, it absolutely is. I can't explain. I'm trying to think if I know the biology behind that. But essentially, from a few cabbages, you do not have enough genetic diversity to ensure like a good strong stock of seeds.
So it's the cross pollination between the 40 plants, even though you're still taking the sort of the seeds from one plant, as it were.
So yeah, exactly, yeah. So you'd get your seeds from the 40 plants, and they'd be mixed up essentially, so they become a kind of more diverse group of seeds when you do that. I'm going to look for a better answer for you though, because that is something that
it's not going to happen in our tiny wee allotment, but I'm just interested in the question.
But I mean, I think 40 cabbages sounds like a lot, but the spacing for cabbages, you know, you're really talking about, you need 25 or 30 foot, you know, assuming your beds are maybe 3 foot wide. So it's not a huge amount of space, but I do get, like, if you're in an allotment, or maybe it's, but then, you know, think about the amount of cabbage seeds you get out of that. So only one person in your entire allotment needs to do that for the next, you know, 5 years. but yeah, so
I'll have a chat with some of my members and see if some of them are going to just put over their entire plot for cabbages.
yeah.
I can imagine the revolt. Oh lordy. It would be great if we could get them each to do 5 or something. That would be terrific. But of course, over a site the size of Mary Lee, I don't suppose there's maybe quite a lot of importance in growing them quite close together so the soil is consistent. Because on a big site like ours, the soil is very different from one end to the other. You know, because of drainage, for instance.
Yeah, I guess there's also the danger, like Rowan was saying, what you would do with the cabbages is you would cover them with, you know, some sort of insect netting to ensure that they weren't cross-pollinating with, say, a broccoli or a cauliflower or a kale at the time that they were flowering. So the danger of doing it across an entire site is that would perhaps become difficult.
I have to say cabbages is a particularly bad one, and it's one I've been thinking about today a lot, because I've been trying to work out, there's a site that I think I can potentially grow some cabbage on, because it's a biennial. The first year I could grow the cabbages outdoors. It's a market garden, so there's lots of other brassicas around, but as long as they're not flowering, they could be grown outdoors in a plot, and then moved for the second year into a polytunnel, and trying to work out whether we'd also need enviromesh as well to cover them when they're in there. But you wouldn't need enviromesh for the first year, so it's kind of the second year that you would need to protect them. So yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot, working out how to save from our cabbages.
Going back to Derek's suggestion, if sort of everybody on the site grew one cabbage, and we've got 50 plots, but covered it with enviromesh when it was flowering, would that work?
Yeah.
Then you could eat your own, you could grow some more cabbages and eat them, but they wouldn't flower, and you could sort of share, and that would be the same with some of the other plants.
Yeah, you could actually do it as an initiative, which meant that everybody was pretty consistent in what the enviromesh was and how it was looked after, and have a couple of folks to just look after it to make sure that it was valid. But there's no reason why we couldn't actually do that. No, you're right.
Well, I guess
interesting.
It all hinges on, why do you need the 40 or whatever that number was? Because if the 40 all need to be cross-pollinating each other, then having enviromesh over 40 individual cabbages spread out over a plot isn't going to work. But if it's okay to just have, I don't know, it all hinges on that question, you know.
Okay, I'm going to do some Googling. I know it's in the seed saving book as well, so I might at some point nip out and grab it and tell you.
Who knew cabbages were so complicated?
And for the drying them, does it have to be natural drying, or can you use sort of dehumidifier or something like that?
So, I mean, so far for things like peas and tomatoes after they've been fermented, the tomato seeds, I've just dried them kind of in trays, so in the air. It's possibly not the best thing to do, but if you wanted to, I think if you have a dehumidifier, that would be really helpful. We watched a video today of Real Seeds. They're set up for drying their seeds, and it's obviously a commercial operation, but you can see the effort they've gone to create an environment, a sealed room with a dehumidifier working kind of constantly to take the moisture out of the room. So yeah, I feel like that's, if you have one, that would be a really great tool. It might be a case of having the seeds in a room with a dehumidifier operating, something like that, a cool room, obviously.
There's a suggestion in the chat, which is that if there are any plots vacant for a while, it might be a good way to make use of them. Gillian, we had an interesting conversation recently about, recently in FebFest, about the lack of plots. So I would be sceptical that a plot would stay vacant in Glasgow for long enough for it to be useful, actually. And then but it is a good idea. And then Jane has asked, how do I order seeds for dye plants from the library, Annie?
Yeah, I was just typing a response. So I think the initial lot we got were actually left from Nature's Rainbow because they had lots of cancelled workshops because of COVID. So it was kind of like an emergency delivery, and they never made it to the official library cabinet. They came to me, and then they went out. So I can put my email address in the box, and I can try and source some for you, because then I can catch up with them and get a new order for the library as well. So I think that would be the best way to go about it.
I was curious myself why you had changed the focus from foods to other plants of use. Was food not doing so well, or?
No, I think food's doing really well. I think it was just also seeing definitely a demand for dye plants. I think Annie found people really were keen and wanted them. And a lot of people have mentioned wanting, people want kind of smaller things as well. So herbs, looking for things they can use in their cooking, but smaller. So yeah, little herbs, and also things they could use medicinally as well. So basically all the kind of whole variation. And I know, sorry, I also had someone growing, really keen on growing flowers for pollinating insects and bees. So yeah, I think it's just recognizing when I met people who I was delivering seeds to or talked to them on email, is that they had a whole, some of them were very like, well, I don't have an allotment, I don't have a private garden, but I can grow these things in these places. Like, do you have any seed, and could I save seed from that? And in general, I think herbs is easier to save seed from, as in you don't need to grow 100 mints or whatever. It's not as difficult. Yeah, so that's kind of why, I think. And there's nothing wrong with food. I want to keep growing food.
I also think, sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
I think once you begin with food, people realize they can actually do that at home. You begin to realize how many things you're using that are like derived naturally. So like even like with making tea and things, it kind of becomes like, oh well, I may as well try and grow it, and then I can just have it with me. So yeah, the food was definitely not going badly. It wasn't dying over food.
We're not long in allotment. We're only 1 year in, but already we're seeing that allotment owners seem to be legendary in overbuying seeds. And is there any sort of way for redistribution of them? Because you have to buy seeds, and you're saying there again you've got 10 squash, but actually there's no way you could grow 10 squash in allotment. So 2 or 3. So could the seed library also redistribute seeds?
Yeah, and we will happily take seeds. If you've bought seeds, we'll happily take those into the library. The condition is that they can't be F1 hybrids.
No, they're from real or vital usually.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, if they're open pollinated seeds, absolutely, like definitely, please please do send them in. When we kind of release the request form, it will also be a way to say I've got these seeds, and then I can be in touch and work out a way to distribute them. I think if it's a really small number, if you've got less than 10 seeds, I think maybe it would be better just to share it within your allotment, community if you can. But if you find yourself with a packet of something, more significant, please do. And it's a swap, it's a share, so you can get something else that you haven't got as well. But yeah, that'd be amazing too.
Can Can I maybe ask Derek, with his hat of president of the Scottish Allotment and Garden Society, on whether you see this type of interest and prioritisation happening nationally and more now than before, or is this part of a pattern essentially, or do you not really see that from where you sit?
Yeah, there isn't an awful lot of push for this at the moment. Certainly, from the brief time I've been involved, most people are excited about getting stuff growing. And to do that, you know, we all know, if you've got an allotment, how much effort it takes and how disappointing it is if you've planted lots of seeds and, you know, you don't get much produce from it. So I've found, certainly from the folks I've spoken to, and again, using the Mary Lee hat, people tend to go to tried and tested methods in order just to get good yields. And the kind of risk that's involved in some of these newer, well, new to us initiatives, but of course, you know, prehistoric actually, when we look back at the history of how seeds and how nature actually informs how we do things. There's definitely a space to promote this, and I think from SAGS's point of view, what we can do is look to help support the likes of the Glasgow Seed Library in terms of, you know, a financial support, perhaps in terms of the postal costs that you talked about earlier on, or just being able to help contribute to that effort. In terms of education, I'm not sure that people are ready to listen in a great number yet, particularly when I think of, you know, plots for hand, perhaps in Inverness, you know, where the ground is still frozen. You know, I know that down here in the west of Scotland, we're able perhaps to get a spade in the ground now and start turning it over ready for the spring. But when their ground is still frozen, or still frozen in Ullapool or wherever, then that season becomes so difficult and so tricky. But so many perhaps in the Western Isles, you know, ground in the Western Isles is covered in polytunnels, and that might actually be a fantastic opportunity for growing in a much more controlled environment. So it's certainly something I'll go back and discuss with the folks and see what we can do. But I would like to, I mean, I've taken a note here. I've written SAGS funding some seed work. Who knows what that might mean? But, you know, I've written it down anyway. So there's definitely something good to come out of this. Just while I'm on, you were going to describe, Rowan, for me, for the heart of thinking, just the basic differences between the F1 hybrids and open pollination.
Yeah, so there is a fantastic video I can share a link to as well, if anyone's confused by my explanation. But an F1 hybrid will be when you have two distinct varieties that have been bred and neither of them have particularly good traits. What a seed company will do was produce a very stable offspring from those two plants, and it will create, say, a nice squash, like with all the good characteristics you want. Doesn't rot and it tastes good and it's not too hard, etc. Unfortunately, what happens, that plant doesn't contain the genetic material that will definitely produce more of that plant. Instead, it has all the other kind of genetic variables from the parent plants, so all the bad traits that you don't want. So if you then, and this, I've actually done this with squash, bad idea, like had a crossbred squash and tried to grow from it, and no, bad idea. So it's very, very unlikely you'll be able to get kind of you won't be able to get a true to type seed from that squash. You won't be able to grow a squash like that squash again. So although the F1 hybrids, they're the main seeds that you'll buy from commercial seed companies, and they're produced, and they are quite a stable kind of strain, but they just cannot be reproduced by us, by gardeners, by growers. That's why you want heirloom, open pollinated varieties of seed. Don't know if that's that makes sense, but I will also find this video that is,
yeah, no, absolutely. No, it just clarifies certain aspects of what we've seen in practice, I guess. Yeah, no, it's fascinating.
I was also I thought it was just really nice. I wanted to pick up on Max and Annie, I think both. Let me see, what did I write down? I thought it was really interesting the way you both talked about this kind of nature of inheritance. Like Annie, you talked about that quite a bit, in the way that we inherit things and pass things on as objects or as living things. And Max, you're also was really struck by you talking about, like, because I almost put ancestor into the slides and I actually took it. I took it out. and this, you were saying about struggling to kind of feel close to our ancestors, often in an urban environment. I don't know if I really had a question, but I just thought it was a really nice thing that was coming up, and made me think about our seeds. And at the moment, I do feel like our seeds are a little bit like our seeds, I keep calling it catalogue, but anyway, our seed stock, it feels a little bit loose and detached. And I'm kind of, one of the things I'm hoping will happen over a few years is that the varieties we have in the library, we have these kind of personal relationships with, and they might be, you know, from historical or heritage kind of reasons, but they might also be new stories that we're telling. So I guess to anyone else who's on the call, if you have a relationship with any seeds or any plants like that, anything that you would like to share, and anything you think we should maybe be growing, but also Max and Annie, if you wanted to comment on that too.
I think there's something. Am I on mute? No, I'm not. I think whilst I was going through all the stuff at Lynn, like I was initially drawn to like interesting objects that weren't alive, and then as we started getting to the plants, there was kind of, because the plants are so tangible, and I think like nowadays we're not as adjusted to handling things that are as tangible as like literally being alive, as we would have been when we had the skills to grow properly and recognize the seasons properly and recognize conditions properly. Like the real extreme comparison would be just how everything's documented digitally. And I think before I'd worked at the house, I hadn't really like firsthand experienced that before, because so much of what I look at is just 2D all the time. So, and also coming out, so the house at Lynn had been privately bought, so I had no real connection to the previous owners, and it felt I was very wary of touching things and like trying to look after things, because in the sense that they had done so much work. They call the tag arts, people may or may not know about them, but they collected plants from all around the world, like legally or illegally, I don't know. And it's like one of the most diverse places in Scotland. And even though that was all of their work, it was also put together in a way that was just nature getting on with it. So even if plants weren't meant to be together or trees weren't meant to be together, what was like eventually it was going to outgrow itself and move on to the next thing. So I was really kind of caught between everything being really, really fragile and not wanting to accidentally kill something or interrupt something that was growing quite nicely, thank you. And also being like, people owned the gardens before 1970 when they bought it, and they were doing something different with it. And when it was bought, it was just like in the 1800s, it was just like a couple of streams and a big mess. So whether we interrupt stuff or not, like it's going to do its own thing. I don't know if Max, you have things to build on that, but it was, yeah, those are the things that I was kind of struck by.
Yeah, I have a couple of points. One is kind of loosely related to dyes and historical uses of things, and this sense of ancestry, and maybe a struggling to relate. And a really nice little fact that I found out recently is that this plant meadowsweet that grows all over Scotland. And in the Highlands, there was this tradition of putting meadowsweet, pretty much the entire plant, in a big pail of water and leaving it for a day. And at the end, you'd be left with this kind of bronzy brown liquid. People would smear it all over their faces and all over the skin, and it was a fake tan. It was like a medieval fake tan. So I really like that. We might turn our noses up at, well, I know I certainly turn my nose up at people who put on loads of fake tan, but actually it's an incredibly traditional thing. But then also related to dyes and that connection with the land. And I think what I'm enjoying is this stuff, like, for example, basket making is something that people might think of as being actually, nowadays quite middle class and quite niche. Back in the day, that would have been pretty much everybody knew how to do it. It was anything but niche. You know, it was completely essential. And people would have understood what materials you could have made things out of, whether it was clothes or whether it was baskets or whatever. People would have had this wealth of plant knowledge and this physical embodiment, you know, this physical way of understanding plants and using them. And that's lost. But also related to the dyes, people's clothes would have reflected the landscapes that they lived in because they would have been using these natural dyes. So you could have looked at someone and been like, oh, well, I think, you know, they have mostly lived, or at least they've gotten their clothes from people who live on a moorland or in a forest or whatever. And so that's just a beautiful idea that I just feel like we lose so much when we start relying on chemicals and man-made things. And we gain so much richness when we go back to these traditional ways of doing things. So, yeah, I don't know how coherent that was, but yeah, that's my 2 cents.
I was going to say, Max, you were kind of getting a feeling that I had when I asked the question of Derek about whether there's a large appetite nationally for this type of thing, because on one hand, like you said, it does strike you as a sort of a very middle class thing. We're talking about the Seed Library and the CCA, and then on the other hand, you know, how did people do this if they didn't save their seeds in the past? So I wasn't sure if it was a stupid question or not when I asked Derek. But I think looking at the time now, this would be a good opportunity to bring it all to a close. So thanks very much, Rowan, Derek, Annie and Max, for taking the time to come and discuss your various viewpoints on all of this with us and tell us about the Seed Library. And I had a friend who came here. She had to leave earlier. She's the one who had to go put her daughter to bed. And she said she came here to find out about seeds. She WhatsApped me separately and left wanting to make a basket. So I'm going to say that maybe this same sentiment is spread across the crowd here. So thanks very much. It's been brilliant. If anyone is still around for the rest of the week, FebFest is on until the 28th of February. Those of you who've been here before have heard me say this 3 times now. Tomorrow is a really, really interesting day. We have a film that's up on YouTube. Go watch it whenever you like. It's about the St Mungo's Cup competition for the best allotment in Glasgow. It's about an hour and a half, really fascinating documentary looking at the guy who always wins it and his next best competition. You'll see who wins in this particular year. And then the director's coming to talk to us about what it's like. The director is also a plot holder in Glasgow, so there'll be a bit of what was it like in the movie, you know, what does it take to win best allotment competition? And I think it'll be really interesting. Is there anything else that I need to say? I don't think so. Judy, Chris, all good here?
Yeah, thanks so much for having us, and yeah, thanks everyone for coming. It's been really, really nice to chat about seeds and other things.
Yeah, thanks everyone. It's been lovely to meet you all, and thanks Chris Scott for looking after it all. Well done, seamless.
Thanks very much. Hopefully it was. Okay, enjoy the rest of your night, folks.
Good night.
Bye.